Hello, everybody, and welcome in to our Fulbright Queer Panel event. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Madeline, and I am the English teaching assistant at Unespar this year. And I'm so excited to be joined by some incredible other English teaching assistants who will get the opportunity to share about queer experiences in the US, in Brazil, some of their own personal areas of expertise about queer experiences, and get to have an opportunity to have a conversation with you guys about what queer communities look like in this intercultural context. So I'm really excited to share. I'm joined by Shane, Kyler, Danny, and Leslie, who come from different universities throughout Brazil and are from different cities within the US, all working as English teaching assistants throughout the country. So without further ado, I'm so excited for you all to join us, and I'll pass it off to our first panelist, who is going to share a little bit about his own expertise, his own background. So first up, we'll have Shane talking to us today.
Hello, everyone. Oi, gente. So my name is, perfect. My name is Shane Mendes Araújo. I'm the ETA here at EFEB Riacho Fundo in Brasilia. I'm 23 years old and I'm born and raised in New York City. I went to a college called Bowdoin in the state of Maine. I studied biology and anthropology. And as a queer man, I've always been interested in how homosexuality has informed our study of science and vice versa. And so today I just wanted to talk a little bit about how homosexuality can be understood from a biological or evolutionary perspective to help decenter humans as the only species that demonstrate same-sex relations. Next slide, please. So one of the most common homophobic arguing points is that homosexuality is quote unquote not normal. It is in quote unquote unnatural lifestyle and goes against the proper dynamic between men and women, a relationship needed to reproduce, to continue on life. Next slide, please. Firstly, we see so much sexual diversity in organisms that aren't humans as well. Some species of birds exhibit multiple sexes, such as the white-throated sparrow. We see male dolphins having sex with other male dolphins for fun, or what we think is for fun. Species of lizards that are completely female and reproduce asexually, and same-sex penguins coupling up. We see that a lot in social media. But there's countless examples, and even within humans, there's intersex individuals who don't necessarily fit this categorization that we assign at birth. Next slide. So these are just a few examples to emphasize how much variation there is in the world. It isn't always clear-cut like we've been conditioned to think. Sexuality has traditionally been viewed from a strictly reproductive point of view, but sexual diversity in nature is not new. It always serves an evolutionary advantage. We just are in the process of figuring out what that advantage is. Next slide. So new research shows that the evolution of homosexuality may serve a social purpose. Views towards sexuality shouldn't be limited to just reproduction. It also influences sociability. So these researchers their hypothesis is that the majority of people may be, let's say, bisexual, and gay individuals would still be the minority. But this is just emphasizing that homosexuality or just queerness in general really exists on a spectrum, and there isn't necessarily this binary that we tend to put onto people, as we've been seeing in nature countless times. Next slide. And additionally, we see that historical records and modern research show that same-sex relations exist relatively uniformly across all cultures, and it isn't just a Western idea. Um, Colonization has played a big role in emphasizing this idea that homosexuality is a Western concept. But we see in ancient Greece, in ancient Egypt, and a lot of ancient societies and cultures, same sex relations were a lot more common. And there was definitely a huge shift when colonization began to occur. Um, Next slide. But all of this is to say that science is heading in a new direction, and being able to prove that homosexuality is in fact natural will allow us queer people to become more and more accepted across the world. Inclusivity is crucial. Valuing and celebrating diversity of all kinds is important for creating a more accepting society. And when we don't fully understand things, we tend to push them away. But instead of rejecting homosexuality, we should continue to investigate why it exists in the first place and advocate for those who are unable to do so. And I think we're at a really cool point in the world where science is heading in this direction that is becoming more inclusive, using more inclusive language, um, stepping away from Western knowledge paradigms and opening up to other forms of inquiry. And yeah, happy Pride. I'm so happy to be here with you all.
I forgot my mic was mute. But yes, thank you, Shane, for your part. It was really fabulous. I am also like crazy about biology in general. So hi guys. So my name is Danielle and I graduated from Stony Brook University with a Bachelor of Science, Health Science. And I am from New York and I'm here in Ufis in Aracaju, Sichipe. So hi to everybody who's watching, hi. So with that out of the way, here are my favorite subject: taxidermy, biology, psychology, and creative writing. The reason why I put my hobbies out there so you will not be alarmed by the topic I chose for tonight. So yes, next slide, please. So cannibalism in animal kingdom is more common than you think. Sharks, like sand tiger shark, cannibalize each other for a little wiggle room to grow in the womb. Polar bears eat up other dead polar bears to survive, out in the Arctic kind of thing. Okay, next slide. And last example for this is black widow spider participate in sexual cannibalism, where female spider eat their mates, usually a male, for their extra calories to live long enough to reproduce the eggs. And why am I listing all different examples of cannibalism? Just to highlight how different they are for different reasons, but all of them are found in one area: human literature and media. Next slide. So let's talk about cannibalism in Korean media. Cannibalism, or one eats the flesh from their own species, is considered as taboo. It's not really the right thing to do. Obviously, eating compared to eating a cow or horse, but because the stigmatization of such act, it found its way in horror genre. The horror movies kind of thing. The goal for horror, in that particular, is to scare, startle, and stun the audience into feeling disturbed or disgust. So here are the four different TV show and movies, like such as General Body, Hannibal, Yellow Jackets, and Bones and all four movies are now movies all medias are great, and they explore into that kind of thing, and I urge you to check them out. So next slide. And so why cannibalism? Cannibalism is often used as a form of love. As London Petty 2024 states, our love is someone is immune to feeling, it's all consuming feeling. So like I said, cannibalism is about eating, but as a metaphor, it's about eating your loved one because you can't contain it. You're so hungry for your love, for everything. Think about Twilight, where Edward wants to, eat Bella, bite her neck, wants her to turn into a vampire, all college this jazz. Similar concept. And I like anime too as well. I will use an example. So you see this image of a purple hair guy, Sukiyama. He loved the smell of the flesh of the main character, which is in the manga cover, Tokyo Ghoul, because in that story, many ghouls, a different species, away from humans, they eat humans to survive. So that is example. And because of cannibalism is used in that, literature, it's hinted that this guy, Sukiyama, is hinted to be queer. So that's an example. But yeah, next slide. And also just, cannibalism as in general is horror is a perfect environment for cannibal metaphor to be used as deals with heavily with unconventional or human psychology and unique or queer relationships. For this case, Scream, even though it does not involve cannibalism one way or another, but I'm talking about using horror, to explore psychology. We see Billy and Stu, they kill people, they murder people, but then we also have scenes where you can tell they're like homoerotic, they're kind of love each other kind of thing. That's an example of horror. So with that, two combined, cannibalism and horror creates a unique a metaphor all together to talk about, being queer is like bad, sin, simple thing. So we use that kind of thing to showcase the loving, really, really love someone, especially if they're like the same sex or opposite sex, and your identity is queer as well. So this is a perfect blend for that. So next slide. So to conclude my topic, cannibalism and queerness is finger licking good. I love that troll, and that's why I decided to talk about it. So yes, this is it for me. So thank you guys. Yeah.
Thank you, Madeline, for inviting me, and thank you everyone for attending and my other fellow panelists for your really awesome and amazing topics. I'm going to just introduce myself and my niche topic. So my name is Leslie Tegueria. I use she, her pronouns in English, ela, in Portuguese. I
Apologies. Looks like we're having some small technical issues. So we're going to move to our next presenter and come back to Leslie. So next up, we get to have Kyler joining us.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you, Maddie, for having me here today. My name is Kyler Johnson, everybody. I am the ETA, English Teaching Assistant at Unipampa Bagé. I am originally from Des Moines, Iowa, which is a state right in the center of the United States. And I also graduated from college there, from the University of Iowa, in English and Creative Writing. Alongside my English and creative writing studies, I was studying various languages, Portuguese, French, Chinese, and translation. And so you can probably surmise from all those different languages and literatures that I love reading, but I'm also a writer. I love to write poetry, essays, novels, plays, translations, the whole works. It really depends on what season of life I'm in and what projects I have going on. You can pass it to the next slide. And so today, what I want to talk to you guys a little bit more about is this notion of queer joy and literature. For me, this is a topic that's very special as both a reader and writer. And to begin, I want to read 2 quotes. The first, "To survive, you must tell stories." It's very short, simple, from an Italian professor named Umberto Eco. And another quote, "I have fallen in love with the imagination. And if you fall in love with the imagination, you understand that it is a free spirit. It will go anywhere and it can do anything." And that's by Alice Walker, who is a Black queer author from the United States. And to me, these quotes intertwined together sum up the idea, the power of queer joy for me, in the sense that through our literature or film, music, whatever form of art it is that we create as queer people, it permits survival to a certain degree. And that with our own imaginations, we have the power to create what that narrative is, what those spaces are. And it's in coming into contact with, coming into understanding our own power, our own imagination, that we can create queer joy and create these joyful spaces for ourselves. You can go to the next slide. And why is this such an important topic for me? Well, when I was growing up, reading and writing was a safe space where I got to explore myself and explore the stories of other people. And for me, it was actually Alice Walker's novel, The Color Purple, which is on this slide here, of different books that spotlight queer joy, that unlocked something within me. Reading the experiences of her main character, sort of discovering herself and working towards joy. And at the end of the novel, I remember I was 15. I remember almost crying, or perhaps I did cry. I don't quite remember, but it was very emotional to see this main character, this Black queer woman, sort of come into all of these aspects of herself and create a space of joy for herself. And to me, that was very demonstrative of what power literature can have and what power we can have on other people by creating spaces that involve queer joy. You can go to the next slide. And so for me, writing, but again, for me, I want to focus on literature, but this can take form in film, music, art, whichever one. Writing and these other forms of art create spaces for us for this introspection, identification, reflection. They create spaces for community. And what we put into our art, what we put into these different modes of expression as queer people, determines what things we allow into our community as well. And so those pictures on this slide represent projects that I'm working on currently, 2 of which are collections of poetry, one of which is an essay collection that I did as a thesis for my undergraduate degree, all centralizing my experiences as a queer man, balancing the joy, the sorrow, all of the different flavors. But I think the things that I'm proudest of within all of these works are the joyful moments that I have been able to capture, because I hope that in capturing my own joy that I experience as a queer person, I can pass that along to somebody else and show a path, just as Alice Walker's The Color Purple showed for me. And so for any of you out there in the audience tonight who are writers or artists of some kind and are queer, consider that when you're creating, that you have the power to inspire and you have the power to show people a way forward. And so know that you are powerful and you have a lot to give this world as queer artists. That's all that I have to share for now. But again, I'm excited to be here and to continue chatting with you guys as the night continues.
This is beautifully put. Thank you so much, Kyler. We're going to go now to Leslie's presentation to talk about queer spaces. So I'm very excited to invite Leslie to the floor.
Thank you, Madeline. And once again, hi, everyone. Sorry about that freeze, but it looks like we're back. So as I was saying, my name is Leslie Telleria. I use she, her pronouns. I have Nicaraguan American heritage, and I was born in Virginia, and I've been living in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, for the past 7 years. I graduated in 2021 from Georgetown University with a major in languages, Spanish, English, and Portuguese. And I focused on Latin American gender and sexuality and artistic expression. And the past 3 years, I've been an educator for primary students as well as all the way up to adult participants of programs of many kind. And now I'm here as an English teaching assistant in Lavras, Minas Gerais at the Universidade Federal de Lavras. Next, please. One thing I'd love to focus on today is my work with Lavender Evolutions. This is a collective that I started with a few friends back in 2022, and it is a community collective for and by QT BIPOC, which is queer, trans, Black, Indigenous people of color. So this is a collective that came out of a need for a third space, especially for queer, trans, Black, Indigenous people of color. We put on a range of different kinds of events and kinds of third spaces, things like book swaps, record swaps, coffee meetups, nature walks, parties, happy hours, and tons of other kinds of events, all of which are either free or very accessible with varying needs and varying ways to meet the needs of our community and ways to collaborate with local businesses and our participants. And so this is work that we find extremely important, as I said, as just as a nationwide trend, we're seeing a disappearance of third spaces, and we know that people are much more healthy and happy when they have access to these third spaces. Next. So here are just some images from our events. As you can see, we have what we like to call a range from low-key to hype kinds of events, things like book clubs or events that meet early in the morning for people who are more morning birds. But then we also like to have fun and celebrate and have happy hours and night parties. So there really is something for everyone. And we also pride ourselves in having a range of accessibility in terms of COVID restrictions and physical accessibility as well. So this is really, like I said, a community by and for our community. And if you want to check out more of our work, you can look at our Instagram, which is lavender.evolutions. I'm not sure if the videos are working, Maddie, but perhaps you can try to play one of them just so we can kind of get a sense of the vibe and the energy that these events bring. But no worries if not, these are also on our Instagram for anyone who can check out later.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leslie. Unfortunately, on this platform, we won't be able to show the videos, but hopefully you take that as encouragement to follow that page and pursue that community. I know the events happening are fantastic and hopefully can give you some inspiration, some ideas for ways to pursue queer spaces in your own community. So thank you all for your incredible presentations. I feel like I personally was able to learn so much, and hopefully this gave you the opportunity to learn more about our panelists, more of their backgrounds, their own experiences, and their own interests and specialties. So now we're going to move to more of a conversation, some Q&A. So if you have questions for our panelists, please type them and we'll be able to just have a casual conversation about what is a queer experience in the United States. What does that look like? So I'll bring everyone onto the floor with me and we'll go to our first question. So what I would like to ask you guys is, how can you describe your experience as a queer person in the US? And how has it compared to your experience in Brazil so far, either as a Fulbrighter now or in past experiences you may have had?
I can go
I
ahead
can start
and
this.
start.
Leslie, you go first. I'll go second.
Sure thing. So, as I just mentioned, I'm from DC, which is not a huge city. It's not like the size of New York or anything, but it's still a city. And now I'm in Lavras, Minas Gerais, which is a really small city in comparison. So, what I have found interesting is how in DC, queer folks really gather in their own bubbles. Like, you'll have whole neighborhoods that are historically gay. You'll have neighborhoods that are perhaps not historically gay, but might right now be majority queer, or a lot of people who you end up meeting happen to live in the same area. And like I said, there are these bubbles. They kind of feel a little bit isolated, and they do not mix a lot with other bubbles of DC, or if they do, they overlap in very specific ways. I would say my experience in Lavras is that these bubbles aren't, they still exist, but I also see queer people represented in more facets of life. I would say more generations of queer people represented, um, people of different occupations, of different lifestyles, even class is represented as well. I think, for instance, I was really shocked once when I went to a neighboring city in Tres Corazones, which is even smaller than Lavras, and I saw queer women taking care of their children. And so while in DC you might have like spaces that are specifically for LGBTQ families, it's not so common to just go to a small town in the US and see visibly queer folks. And I know this is not the experience all across the board, but I don't know, there might be something there about like folks feeling a little bit more comfortable expressing their gender nonconformity, even if they are not surrounded by queer community. But you know, folks might disagree with that. That was just one experience that I had, and I've only been here for a few months, but I'm curious to hear what other people's observations have been.
Super well said, Leslie. And a little similarly, so as I mentioned before, I'm from New York City, and I'm now in Brasilia, which is also a pretty large city. I guess one of the biggest in Brazil, actually. And I think your conversation before about third spaces, I think is really significant because similarly in New York and in DC, like there's a lot of historically queer neighborhoods, or if they're not historic, they become seen as queer neighborhoods in recent history. And while I think that, of course, New York is a very like out and proud city in terms of queerness, there's still a lot of diversity, and I think it's quite similar in Brasilia. So far, like although I've only been here for a few months, Brasilia feels like a very queer city to me. I think that comes with the large size. But one big difference that Leslie also mentioned is I feel like there's third spaces are like really crucial for the queer community in Brasilia to come together differently than in New York, where there's these historic neighborhoods or these now queer neighborhoods where people congregate. I think like clubs and events and parties, all of these sort of third spaces and different meetups are like really crucial for the queer community in Brasilia. And while I don't think there is one specific neighborhood in Brasilia or city that is known for being queer, I think it's really spread out kind of wherever you are. And that's what I think is really lovely about Brasilia. And my queer community at EFEB Riacho Fundo is so immense and so large. It really warms my heart.
Oh wait, you want to? Do we answer this question too, right? I can chime in a little bit. Okay, yeah. Yes, thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Shane. Those are really interesting. For me, I would say I'm from New York, but I am from an area where it's more conservative. You know, especially I am living along with like older immigrants, you know, people of color, predominantly Black and Hispanic. So it is hard for me to walk around as a queer person. You know, you cannot be just too open. You know, especially I'm a queer woman. You know, I'm bisexual, so it's hard for me to like find other people who are like me. You know, it's very hard because I live in a small city, so where were spread fast, so it's not good to be out 100%. But in universities, for sure, if you go to Central Park, if you go to New York City subways, they're more open, queer for sure. But I think it's where I'm from, it's hard to do, like, be out yourself by yourself authentically. But in here in Aracaju, everybody's more open, more queer. I met a lot of transgender and gay men, especially because I see some. I have a lot of them are my friends now. So I'm more happy, and there's definitely you see other queer women as well. It's easier to spot them, easier to see because they are, they be themselves. So it's like a huge culture shock. But I'm happy. I'm embracing that, here in Brazil. So I'm grateful for that.
Thanks, Danielle, for sharing all of that. I think it's very interesting hearing you guys all talk about coming from bigger cities. So to remind everybody, I'm from Iowa, which is a more agricultural state. There's more pigs than people. I am from Des Moines, the capital, however, so I am from a larger city in that state, but I grew up in the suburbs. And so I remember growing up and having queerness not necessarily be as present in my community, simply because there weren't really any third spaces that were, places that I could go or see queer people in my own community. Suburbs are very isolated communities in general. And so I feel like in a lot of ways, there isn't as much of a community exposure when you grow up in suburban communities as opposed to cities. And here in Bagé, I also lived in Porto Alegre for a couple months, but due to the floods, I had to move. So it's interesting being here in Brazil and seeing two different cities. In Porto Alegre, having it be a very vibrant and sort of, it sounds very similar to some of the experiences of my colleagues here, where there's kind of so many different flavors of queer in Porto Alegre being a big city. And here in Bagé, there are also a lot of queer people that I see and I've gotten to meet. But it's interesting how being a smaller town and in the countryside and being closer to the maybe the gaucho spirit, the cowboy spirit of the state, that there's still work in terms of coming to like accept, I think, the varieties that queerness can take and sort of how it can present itself. I think that there's a greater preoccupation in Bagé with image, just from what I've been able to see and what I've been able to talk with people about, specifically some queer people and their own growing up experiences and having to talk with their families. And it seems like here there's maybe a little bit more preoccupation with image, which I actually think is very similar to my suburban experience, albeit different. I think both communities, both the suburbs of Iowa and here in Bagé, there's a greater preoccupation with how you are perceived by the wider community. So very interesting.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for your answers to this. I think this demonstrates that Brazil and the US are very similar in the way that you have different types of cuisine, different types of geography, different accents, and in that same vein, very different queer experiences from city to city, sometimes different areas within the same city, person to person. But so it's exciting for all of you to share the experiences that you've had. The next question that I have for you guys is kind of along this line of there's a lot of differences within the US, within Brazil, but are there any similarities or differences that you've noticed kind of comparing queer cultures in the two countries?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we touched upon a few of these things just based on this previous question, but one of the biggest differences I noticed since moving here is that like queer slang or like vocabulary is really different and developed really separately from the queer slang vocabulary we have in the US. And I think one of the biggest core differences is the way that like Portuguese and English allow for a different kinds of words. For example, I think it's really interesting how in English we use top or bottom to describe like your position in sex, and in Brazil it's ativo or passivo. So we see that in Portuguese, even your role in sex has either an active or like a passive, I guess, point of view. And I think another big difference is how language has informed queer acceptance. In Portuguese, it's a very gendered language. Basically, everything is assigned a gender, and therefore it makes it difficult to be inclusive towards like non-binary people or people who exist between the male and female binary. In English, the one advantage is that the language isn't gendered. So, from my perspective, it's been easier for American society to use gender neutral language like they, them pronouns because we're taught in school that using they doesn't necessarily mean more than one. I think Brazil may have more difficulty in the future trying to create changes that would be more inclusive. It's an issue I think a lot about, but on the other hand, even though English is a gender neutral language, you would assume it would therefore be easier to be inclusive. But we still have a long way to go when it comes to validating non-binary identities, and people are really stuck in their ways. But over time, I think people will come around, and a big reasoning behind the reluctance I'm about to touch on, which is gender roles and religion. And another difference, I think, is the strictness of gender roles. I think the typical roles of men and women are still more rigidly enforced in Brazil. And this most definitely still exists in the US, but I think especially in recent history to a slightly lesser degree. And I think this connects to my last point. And I think the last major difference is also kind of a similarity in some regards, is the influence of like religion when it comes to tolerance or intolerance. Like in the US, there's so much religious diversity, yet at the end of the day, the government is still heavily influenced by the Bible, and there are many figures in power who are pushing legislation that's based on the Bible, even though there's supposed to be a separation between the church and state. And Brazil being the largest Catholic country in the world, I've been learning about how intensely religion influences almost everything here, especially with the rise of evangelicalism. We're seeing a similar movement gaining power in the US as well. And it's been affecting not just queer people, but like women's bodily autonomy, both in the US and Brazil. Sorry, y'all. So on the other hand, one major similarity I've noticed is how visible and vocal queer people are in both countries. I really think that Brazil is such a colorful, vibrant, and queer country. Sometimes I feel even more so than the US, but at the same time, it really depends on region and the hub that you're in. Similarly, in the US, in Brazil, I feel like it really depends on if you're in an urban center and who you surround yourself with in your community. For example, in Sao Paulo and in Brasilia, the cities feel really queer and the community is very visible. But I know that is very different reality for those who live in more rural or religious communities. That being said, while Brazil has the highest anti-queer violence rates in the world, poor and marginalized communities in the US and Brazil face the majority of homophobic violence as well.
Well, thank you for your answer to that. There's a lot of similarities and differences, I think, in a lot of different aspects of the culture, which is really interesting. The next question that I have for you guys is, can you talk more about queer gathering spaces? So I think in the US, a lot of times when people think of queer gathering spaces, their mind goes to gay bars. And that's probably the end of it. Maybe the club, and even thinking about Brazil, there's a similar stereotype of, oh, you just go to the right club, to the right bar. But the reality is, in both of these situations, there's so much more than just the drinking culture that follows that. So can you describe what that means in the US context that you've experienced, and also perhaps in the Brazilian context as well?
Yeah, I can definitely talk about that. As you all know, I'm involved with event organizing with Lavender Evolutions. And that is something that we definitely think about as organizers of a predominantly sapphic, predominantly lesbian, bisexual, transmasculine collective. There's a lot of talk about the disappearance of lesbian spaces and bars in the United States. From 1980 till now, towards the beginning of those years, there was, I think, over 200 lesbian bars in the entire country. And now in 2024, there are only 30. And the number just continues to decrease. For instance, there's one lesbian bar in DC called As You Are, which is the home for many people, especially non-binary, lesbian, sapphic people. And right now they are undergoing some major changes and are possibly looking to close down, which is terribly sad. That being the only space, one of very few. And so I kind of find it interesting. There was so many like documentaries about this phenomena a few years ago, lots of think pieces, articles, people asking, why is it that lesbian bars are disappearing? Is it something about the way that we gather? Is it something about the history of lesbian gathering in the United States? And I think a lot of it's really interesting, and honestly, there could be a whole essay about this. But it's really fascinating too to see that in like 2024 and also here in Brazil, there's the rise of more kind of like DIY, do-it-yourself parties or events. When I went to Sao Paulo for Pride, for instance, I came across this really cool collective that was throwing a party for trans masculine people in Sao Paulo. So you kind of like see all of these collectives meet their community's niche, and then they kind of develop a whole array of events and portfolio for that community. And I think while it is important to still have a physical space and it is really important to support lesbian bars in 2024, it's also really important to honor how the flexibility that these pop-up spaces give us is actually a benefit in a lot of ways, because as I said, it can meet those niche communities where they're at, and then also it can meet other needs, such as having events that are not centered around alcohol, like you were referencing, or having events that are perhaps during different days of the week for people who have different work schedules or with different accessibility concerns, COVID precautions, wheelchair concerns, and ASL interpreters. So there's a lot of different benefits that come from having more of these like small collectives putting these events together. And so far I've seen a lot of really cool stuff happening in Brazil too. But yeah, curious to hear if anyone else has any observations.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that answer. I love to see the fact that the gathering spaces are adapting to meet different needs of different members of the community. I think that's very cool. The next thing I want to talk about, which is something I'm excited to hear your answers for, as you're willing to share, is about coming out experiences. So how can you describe what it's like in the US, either in general with what you're familiar with, personal to you as you're comfortable sharing, and how has that been changing over time? So I'd love to hear your thoughts, your observations, your experiences on this.
Yeah, I am glad to hop in and chat about this topic. Hello, everybody, again. I think to start, I want to give a little bit of framework about myself, because I'm coming at it from a personal angle, in the sense that I was somebody that grew up in the early 2000s and 2010s, and I, like I said earlier, grew up in the suburbs of Iowa, where a lot of my exposure to queerness didn't come from the community around me, but via internet, which I think for a lot of people nowadays, that's also a very common case, to understand your queer identity and other queer experiences via the internet. But as that relates to coming out, for me, it was witnessing the YouTubers, the other internet sort of celebrities that were coming about as I was growing up, and witnessing them come out in this very public fashion. And for me, coming to understand coming out as this very big ritual with this sort of lot of pressure. It's some kind of a performance in a lot of ways. And it's climactic. It's the climax of something. It's a turning point. And also to give a little bit of context about my family, I grew up with two gay aunts, one on my mom's side, one on my dad's side. And they had very different coming out experiences, both coming from different small Midwestern towns. For one of my aunts on my dad's side, it was very relaxed. It was kind of not really talked about. It was just sort of something that was accepted as is and moved on. It didn't necessarily cause any problems. And for my other aunt, it was something that made my grandma cry. Like, it was something that was devastating to find out. And so I think throughout time, hearing their experiences, and then also seeing a lot of different experiences on the internet, I too kind of came to internalize this understanding of coming out as a ritual where, you know, you could have one of two possible consequences. Either it comes with sort of a natural acceptance, or there's some sort of tragic nature to it, some sort of tragic end, which for me made the process of coming out very similar. I felt a lot of pressure having to sort of navigate how would I do that with my parents. I felt like I had to make a statement online, which I know isn't just an experience for me, but for also other people, other friends of mine that I know in the United States. However, all that said, this idea of it being sort of a really big ritual in some ways, I think that we're sort of at a point where that's changing in a lot of ways. I think that one of the big discussions right now in the queer community is it a necessity to have to come out, or do we have to question people's sexual orientations? Do we have to try and label things, right? Because something else with coming out is sort of coming into a label. And so I think that there's a lot of discussions happening on whether we need to have that be a very common practice or sort of an expectation of somebody in the queer community to come into a label, when a lot of about being queer is, you know, defying a certain label and not having to stick something so nice and neat on yourself. And so from what I'm seeing, again, on the internet, the queer spaces that I'm involved in online, it's interesting to see how we're sort of maybe changing because of, you know, this very dramatic, in some ways, history that coming out has had, into something that shouldn't have to be so intense. And so I would love to hear about anybody else on the panel if they have sort of experiences. I know they're fellow Gen Zers, and so they probably have other experiences that they wish to share and sort of chime in on.
I think I'll just share this really cute, fun experience I had in Brazil recently. So I went to a waterfall in Minas Gerais. There's lots of waterfalls. And I went alone. I've been doing a lot of solo traveling in my time here in Brazil. And I struck up conversation with a 9-year-old. Her name was Esther. She was super sweet, super conversational. I was very impressed by how articulate she was. And then just the natural question of, do you have a boyfriend, came up, and I said, no, but I do have a girlfriend. And she was like, oh, so you're a lesbian? And I was like, yes. And as I said that, I was prepared for a variety of responses. Having been a second grade or first grade teacher in the United States, I've had some kids who, you know, upon finding out that I'm queer, kind of have some disgust, because you can tell maybe their parents kind of train them to have that reaction, or maybe they've never heard of it before, so they don't know how to process it. And there's like all this shock and, you know, emotions. So I was bracing myself for that, because that was my first time coming out to a Brazilian child. And I just found it so hilarious how she was like, oh. And then she just moved on to the next topic and like started showing me her moves in the waterfall and like splashing around water like it was her superpower. Like, it was so cute. And I just thought it was so very, I don't know, indicative of perhaps the way that this whole ritual that you were saying, Kyler, of like coming out, how like you have to make this whole process about it, and it can be like this super emotionally heavy thing, and you have to publicize it to the whole world via Facebook. I think that's changing, and I think it's changing for the better. And I think the youth is also understanding slowly but surely, this is just like any other arbitrary trait. This is like me being like, hey, I've got black hair. Like, it's just a part of me.
That's really well said. I love that. And I agree with what you and Kyler said. I also feel I also am going to echo that I feel like the idea of coming out is not necessarily for everyone. I think oftentimes coming out is more so coming out for straight people, and having to publicly declare your identity, which I think can be a bit backwards at times, especially given that sexuality is a spectrum. I just think your own queer journey should be on your own terms and can be flexible and can change over time. I agree with what Kyler said about labels kind of going against the literal like idea or definition of queerness. Yeah, just wanted to add that on.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for your answers for this. I have one more question for now to ask all of you, which is that we talk about diversity in the queer community, and obviously things are moving slowly than we want them to, but moving towards a more positive, more inclusive direction. But there is some diversity within the community. So are there any internal debates within the LGBTQ plus community that you can talk about? Things like gender, sexuality, LGBTQ plus rights, even the idea of how labels aren't important from person to person. Are there any things under this topic that you could touch on?
Oh yeah, yeah. So it's me by speaking for the first time. I was listening to everyone's responses, beautiful, well said kind of thing. I appreciate y'all. But yeah, so as someone who spends most of the time on internet, because it relates to my other identity that I am deaf, so I'm not able to communicate in person as well, as my peers. So I tend to turn to internet, where I can read things, where I can communicate through words, kind of thing, without like verbalizing, So and because of my disability, that allows me on internet. So I've been seeing like a lot of discourse. I've been seeing like from different social medias, from Instagram to Facebook to Reddit and even Discord. I see everything. So because of that, I feel like I can like weigh in on this question. So this year, every time there's a Pride Month, every single year, there's always something going on. Someone brings it up, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, why? Why you say that?" That's so, I think in the U.S. people are more, focused, put too much emphasis on labels, which Kyler and Shane was saying earlier, and that can be detrimental, And so with that in mind, so this year debate right off the bat from Pride Month was, are straight boyfriends allowed at Pride? And that was the question some would say. And a lot of people made jokes. A lot of people, made disparaging comments, about bringing straight boyfriends, not a good idea. But then you have to realize not everybody can look queer, presently, like, with different hair colors, different clothing aesthetics, the kind of thing that screams, I'm queer. Not everyone can do that for a variety of reasons. Like, for example, they try to keep a closet, for safety reasons, they have parents that are conservative as hell, like myself included. So, so, and also some straight boyfriends, they might be actually transgender men, and that might be conforming to cis heteronormative society, was out of safety. Or they could be a non-binary, male side at birth folks, who are presenting, or this trans masculine, non-binary or even lesbian butches, they all look different, So a lot of people argue that, and there's a lot of jokes that there's always there's bisexual women bringing their straight boyfriend to Pride, or they bring it to lesbian spaces. That's a whole different conversation. But this is to talk about like this every year. There's always in debate on any different things. And there's also another issue going on between being bisexual versus pansexual. So a lot of people think that if you're bisexual, that means you're transphobic. That means you're attracted to men and women only, but not non-binary or transgender people, which is not true. I'm a bisexual woman myself, and bisexual label has always been inclusive since the start of time, including a bisexual manifesto for 1990. It's always been inclusive. Bisexual is just an umbrella, term, and bisexual, pansexual fall under that label, in the same way, transgender is an umbrella term and non-binary fall under that, but not everyone identify as trans, So it's a similar concept, similar idea. A lot of people are like very, argumentative about it. So there's another issue. There's so much more like nowadays. Now this debate I'm seeing like last week where there is a trans masculine butch, who came out and said, I'm a butch. But then if you look at the image of them, you'll see that they have mustache, they have top surgery, they are testosterone, and a lot of lesbians like, I think you're a man, I'm not attracted to you, so it's kind of transphobic because if the person, she identifies being a butch, let her identify as such, labels work differently for different people. I think in the US, especially like the queer spaces are often dominated by white folks, so they're very picky, kind of thing. So, but yeah, this is all kind of things. But yeah, I'll give other people to talk,
Yeah, Danny, I really enjoyed getting to hear what you had to say about the internal debates within labels, and I think the various spectrums that exist in both gender and sexuality is something that I think is something I hear a lot, and also discussing with my gay family members who are older. It's interesting to see how, in some ways, for example, my one of my aunts, she and I often have a debate over, how should a queer community be defined? And for her, she sees sexuality and gender as, being so different, that it's hard for us to sort of fight for all of these different, to fight for the rights for trans people, for queer people of all shapes and forms, and that we should sort of be separating certain issues and not trying to group together. Whereas I often come at it from a very different perspective of, I think that as queer people, be it with gender, be it with our sexuality, be it with whatever form, that coming together is actually one of the most powerful things we can do, and sort of giving ourselves, a community, but B, also giving ourselves a better chance to fight for, our rights within the law, and in a way that we have to not just stick up for ourselves, but we have to stick up for others as well. I think we can't isolate ourselves just simply within our own queer identity. To be queer is to also understand other people's queer identities. It's to allow yourself to empathize beyond yourself. To be queer is to be pushed out, right? And so I think that sometimes within the queer community, depending on other aspects of your identity, intersectionality comes into play. What other power structures benefit you? I think certain times we can get blinded within the LGBTQ community by maybe other aspects of our identity that allow us into the mainstream, rather than realizing we need to, even if we have access to identities, whether it be through our race, through our gender, whatever it may be, we have to support our other like queer folk that understand us in a way that nobody else can. And so I know that's a debate that I have a lot with my queer family members, and I think it's one that is, I think just as Danny was talking about with different labels, is something that happens quite often within our community.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for your answers to that. I think that really reiterates the point as well that even within the community, there's some room to grow, but that importance of compassion, of listening to people, of really being very intentional for people's individual experiences and identities is so important. And it's something we hope for ourselves and hopefully can provide to other people. I love all of those answers. So thank you guys so much for all sharing. And for everyone that's here and listening, hopefully there's some questions that you guys will have, but we also want to be mindful of your time. So for all of you who were in attendance, we have the ability to make some certificates for you. So if you are watching on your phone or on your computer, you can scan this QR code right here, and Unespar will generate a certificate of attendance just to thank you for taking your time to come, to hopefully have the opportunity to learn something new about queer identities and spaces and experiences in the US. So hopefully this will be something that can help for your resume, your portfolio. So filling this out should be super easy, and we'll make this available in the description after this live is finished. But for those of you who have questions, we'll be here for a few more minutes to hang out, answer any questions you have. But I just want to thank all of you for coming and joining us. I know this is a busy part of the semester, so we enjoy all of you making the time to hear from our panelists and support them and be part of this conversation about the advancement of queer rights and queer spaces and intersectionality and queer identities. So please fill this out so we can give you a certificate if you're interested. And we'll be here for a moment. So if you have any questions, type it in the chat and let's talk together. All right, but thank you guys so much. All right, it looks like we do have a question to talk about. So this one has to do with queer representation in the media. Thank you, Pedro, for asking this. Especially in Gen Z, you see it's becoming more evident in movies and TV show across social media for sure. How does that feel to you? Does it feel like a good representation? There's obviously different types and qualities. So what are your thoughts on this here?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start a response, and if anybody wants to chime in after, feel free. I think the one thought that I have going on in my head right now is this notion, is the Alice Walker quote that I had during my part of the presentation, dealing with imagination and the power of imagination. And I think right now we are entering a space in which queer people are getting to use their imagination and project it into media in a way that we haven't seen quite so much in the past. At least I would say in the quantity that we're able to see it nowadays. And I would say that to me, based on the number of books that I'm seeing being published, as well as the variety of TV shows, it's growing. I think that there's probably still stereotypes. There are things that enter into queer media that sometimes cause issues, cause debates, which is good. It's important for us to maybe have those things reflected in media, so then we can figure out if a certain stereotype is something, is it healthy? Is it not healthy? Is it something that we want to keep within our community, within our discourse, and so I also think that there's a lot of space right now within media where we're imagining stories, we're imagining what a possible future could be. And I think there's still more room for growth and how and what other stories we can include. But I think personally, I feel I feel happy to see how much queer representation is in media. I still think that there can be more. But in my mind, it's going in the right direction.
Yes. Thank you, Kyler. I would like to add because I think this question is really good because nowadays we see a lot of improvement in terms of queer representation. It's not just gay men being villains. Nowadays now it's more nuanced kind of thing. Now we see like you know evil lesbian taking control, or something like cannibalism is another way to show yearning for love in the newest complex way, like Hannibal. He is a villain and he's a gay man. I believe so, but the reason why he cannibalizes people is because of learning yearning for connection, for love, rather than he's killing. It's a distant matter. Oh, I kill people, I eat people because I'm a villain, I'm a bad guy. No, I think they're able to give more nuances, so I'm pretty happy with that. But unfortunately, we see a disparity of representation between men and women, let alone transgender and non-binary folks. They are still fall behind, but we're focused on disparity because I talk about this in one of my conversation clubs where we see a lot more lesbian relationship be portrayed in kids' cartoon because they're safe. They're like, oh, you can play out as girls be besties. They kiss, they are simple, but nothing, happening. They're pure because, and that's not good. Well, we see more gay relationship in more mature TV show because they see homosexuality as like something dark, something heavy. So, and that's the issue because of that. So that's why nowadays, this year, we have more sapphic movies like Love, Life, Bleeding, Bottoms, and other movies that center around, sapphic characters that take on, darker roles, in horror genre because horror is the perfect place, for everything. Explore the relationship, explore how fucked up we live in this world. That's horror. So we see more sapphic relationships happening in horror, as well as cannibalism. But of course, there's still a long way to go, in terms of queer media. But I see it's improving. But if we add more queer writers in the writers' room, for sure we'll see reflect. I think one is Purpose show like that did their job was I forgot it's a pirate show with queer pirates. I forgot the name of it. It's on HBO. It got canceled, but it had queer, characters. Like we had non-binary, bisexual character that broke the stereotype of Mulan. Like Mulan was disguised as a, she's a girl, but she disguised herself as a man to survive. To get through a fight. But in this show, in the pirate show, this non-binary named Jim Jimenez, uh, did the same thing, pretend to pass as a cis man, but then when other pirates find out about them, they're like, "Oh, I'm not a woman. I'm a non-binary. I will identify," and they respect their identity. So that's like very progressive, in this time and age, in 2021, But hopefully we see more of that. But if you guys have any others thing to add, you can go ahead.
Yeah, just to tie this question up, I think there is like more representation in the media, especially like television and movies. And while I think it's great and there's definitely a greater demand for queerness in the media, I think oftentimes it sets up like a really unrealistic expectation or a really romanticized version of our lives that are not typically true. It typically doesn't pan out that way. So I think like moving forward, I'd love to see more realistic or raw portrayals of our lives, the interesting parts and the mundane and the unique parts, all of it.
Yeah, I think the nuance that comes with it is really important to recognize. Thank you guys so much for your answers for this. That representation is a good thing, but representation done well is the most important. And that's not evident everywhere, unfortunately, but we're slowly seeing more and more good examples, which is really exciting to see. Another question that I'd love to hear your answers about is about expectations versus reality. So all of us moved here because we're interested in Brazilian cultures. Maybe you had an idea of what it would be like queer cultures in Brazil, and how did that compare to the experiences you've now had in your time here?
I can start with
Hey,
just a quick
Felix. Ooh.
observation. Once again, Shane, I'll just be quick. But something that when I was studying Brazilian culture and society that I thought was so fascinating was how can a country that is so, I guess, forward with its queer and trans celebrities, people like Pablo Vittar, Gloria Groove, Lineker, like these are people in the spotlight of Brazilian music, but then you have like so much representation in the media. How can that also be a country where it is one of the deadliest people for trans and gender non-conforming people? And so when I came, I kind of expected to, I don't know, see that balance play out of, queer Brazilian artists being at the forefront of art and trends, but then also for it to be kind of violent for queer people, or perhaps not always the most welcoming space for people who fall out of that gender binary expression. And I will say that I'm still taking it in. I'm still understanding what it's like to be, for instance, for me, I think I'm not a very visibly gender nonconforming person. So my experience is going to be very different from someone who is gender queer. But I have noticed there are a lot of people who are gender nonconforming, who are out of that binary, who are living their lives, who are still expressing themselves exactly the way that they would want to. Whereas I see a lot more gender queer people in the United States who are closeted also in their expression, who while they are gender queer, they might still dress and appear straight passing just for their own safety. Here, I find that people are a lot more authentically themselves, but that might just be from my limited time here too. It might be totally different in other places.
That is a great point, and a lot of what I was going to touch on. Also, hey, Felix, thanks for the question. I also was like grappling with that same question, like how is Brazilian society, especially the queer community, so visible and so loud? Like that's what I really love about queer Brazilians and just Brazilians in general. Like they make themselves so visible and loud in the best way possible. Yet also like there's this fact of such a high rate of anti-queer violence. I thought it would. I'm not really sure I can even like say that my expectations were super different than what I experienced, but this like the violence aspect, I'm very removed from, so I can't even really speak on that. But I think one thing that exceeded my expectations was how queer my university was, like especially the English department. Like there's such a strong and loving queer community at my school, like not even just in the English department, but I feel like a lot of students in university in Brazil, in my experience, are very queer, and I don't think that's necessarily something you see as strongly in the U.S. So I would say that my expectations was that Brazil was a very queer country, and I would say that it was kind of met.
That's excellent. And what a perfect sentiment to end on, right? Is what a joy it is to get to be here in Brazil, to get to experience queer communities in Brazil. And it's also been such a joy to get to discuss this with all of you. Want to thank you guys again. I think I'll keep saying thank you for the rest of the time we're out here, for taking the time to share and talk and bring your experiences and your interests out here. It's been a joy to get to listen to all of you and learn from you. Thank you so much to everyone who took the time to come listen to us. We loved hearing all of your questions and your feedback. And we hope all of you enjoy the last few days of Pride Month and Pride Year. And enjoy your queer spaces, right, even after June, and keep moving forward. So thank you guys so much for joining, and hopefully we'll get to see you guys in something like this again. But for now, bye-bye. Hope everyone enjoys the rest of your evening, and thank you so much for joining us. All right,
Thanks,
peace out,
everybody.
y'all.
Maddie.